Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome back to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. I first met Sean as the Australian National Brand Ambassador for Johnnie Walker and the Classic Malts during the second industry event I had ever attended. Coincidentally, that was at Malt Dining, owned by another guest of the program, Nick Pinn. But Sean's career has spanned every role imaginable in the Australian bar scene, and he even had a short stint on Masterchef in 2014. Now a partner in the South Australian spirits company, Never Distilling Co, Sean works as brand director and plays an important role in drink strategy and development. Through Sean's leadership, Never was named by Drinks International as the 10th hottest trending global gin brand in 2022. Folks, so that we can keep running the show, Access Collins has sponsored this episode. Their revolutionary booking and inquiry management software for hospitality is designed to help operators increase foot traffic, maximize revenue, and tackle no-shows. And they're doing that. The average user on their platform sees 18% more web bookings, an increase of 25% on inquiry conversion rates, and up to 900 hours saved in admin each year through automation. If that might help you too, check them out at bit.ly/hosposponsor. Hello and welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on.
It's been a while. We've been back and forth a bit. I love getting up to Brisbane. It's always fun to be home.
Oh, Brisbane welcomes you back, Sean.
So does the humidity, which I admit it's always fun to walk back at the airport.
It is quite warm, and we are getting into the latter end of, or the middle, through the middle to the end of autumn, so it should be getting cool soon, but no, it's cooler down where you are in Adelaide.
I was going to say, mate, Brisbane never gets quite as cool as Adelaide.
Yeah. Sean, I know that you've listened to a few episodes, and way back, you're actually catching up after this interview with Mr. Jamie Fleming. I know that he's a very, very old guest of the show. I think he was episode 5. I've referred to that episode many times over the years.
He's a good friend. I didn't want to say it was my favourite episode, otherwise he'd let me know about it.
It's certainly a throwback. It's a long time ago, back in 2017, I think was when that interview was. But it's great to have you on the show. For those that aren't familiar with Never, I've given a bit of an intro prior to the episode recording, but I'd love to open up the interview today with the same way that I do with every episode, which is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. So provide the option there. Feel free to take it whichever way you'd like.
I think one of the things for us when it comes to Never, one of the craziest parts, I think, of the actual brand was when we started the business in the back of a shed in Royal Park back in 2017, about the same time Jamie was doing the show. We'd put together the branding and the labeling and put a lot of work into the way it was going to look and feel. And there was this vista that we got, a local bartender, Kerry Wright, who was working at a Udaberry, really great bar in Adelaide. And she was working as an artist as well. And she did a lino. And she asked us what we were inspired by. And we have always wanted to get into the regional parts of South Australia, Barossa, McLaren Vale, maybe the Adelaide Hills. And it was amazing to suddenly see this vista come to life on our bottle, which had nothing really to do with any kind of place that we understood or thought existed. And then skip ahead 3 years driving up the driveway to Chalk Hill and getting to the top of that hill and realising that the vista that she had imagined matched up with the outlook of our now incredible award-winning cellar door was a very spooky and quite inspiring kind of moment. We didn't really think that we had manifested our own destiny at that particular stage, but it's so shocking when everyone drives up that hill and thinks that label existed because of that hill line, and completely the other way around. It was like we had dreamed it up.
Could have been the other way around there, because you had this vision, this vista, that led you down the road to selecting that site.
Could have absolutely been that, without question. I think we were just lucky. We drove up that hill not really anticipating what the result was going to be, and within half an hour we had shook hands with Tom Harvey, who owns Chalk Hill Wines, and said, yeah, sure, put a distillery here. And lo and behold, a year and a half later, we were cutting the ribbon on what will become a huge part of the next future of our brand. So it might not be as crazy sort of hospitality story as some of the stuff that I used to do in my 20s at nightclubs in Brisbane, but for me, it was probably one of the most surreal parts of starting a business in the gin industry.
There's a lot in there, and there's so many roads that I'd like to go down with you today, Sean. I've got a number of questions for you. But I'd actually like to ask you first, you mentioned the distillery was award-winning, so I might open that up a little bit more because you've won a lot of awards. More recently, you've won some awards.
Yeah, I mean, it's bananas, right? Like, I still remember when I was working at Diageo and I understood how big a deal awards like the San Francisco Spirit Awards and the World Spirit Awards are. And to have won World's Best Classic Gin in 2019 for Southern Strength, and then World's Best London Dry a couple of months ago, beating incredible brands from around the world, brands that have been a part of the industry for hundreds of years. If you're talking about Tanqueray, that was a pretty surreal and amazing moment to kind of sit back and reflect on. You know, awards, they don't mean an awful lot sometimes when it comes to the way that people purchase or necessarily what makes a great bartender spirit, for example, but it really highlights the fact that independently we're reviewed as some of the best gin in the world. And that, if you had told me that when we started the business, that we would be winning some of the most reputable sort of competitions out there, like, I just wouldn't have believed you. It just seemed like a bridge too far, because I know how many times and how rare they can sometimes be to win. So to do it as regularly as we're doing it, to continue to hit the upper echelon of what it takes to make a great gin, is something we were truly, truly proud of.
So if you honestly believe that, you don't think you would have won those awards. What was the vision when you started the business?
I mean, I always wanted to win those awards, but I just thought it was going to be quite challenging. There's so much competition in the market. And, you know, I had come from a whiskey background. I certainly loved gin. I drank a lot of it on a whiskey tab occasionally. I was always enjoyed a Negroni and a Martini from a very long time ago. Tim Boast, who's our master distiller, he himself, you know, has only been a distiller for 5 years, and this year won World's Best Distiller twice in 2 separate competitions. Like, his capacity for brilliance when it comes to creativity, when it comes to the liquid that he's able to deliver, is, for me, is gobsmacking. He's an incredible, incredible talent. And we didn't know that when we started off. The most he had produced was in his back shed, and ultimately he was untested in the market. It wasn't like we were getting some distiller from another business that had been distilling for 20, 30 years. We were all starting out completely fresh at it. So to have achieved what we've done in 5 years, I think, is probably the thing I am the most proud of when people sort of talk about what is it that makes you so incredibly happy when it comes to Never Never. And it's really, really that.
To achieve those sorts of things, you obviously need a great product, but you have to distribute that product as well. And I can imagine the network and contacts that you had from your previous world would have helped you to do that.
Definitely helps when you've got a Refidex and you can call up a number of different bar operators and bartenders. It's quite funny now. When I was picking up glasses at Family Nightclub in 2002 as a bussy, I would have never have thought that one day my product or spirit would be back bars all around Brisbane. But I also kind of never thought that a lot of the bartenders and bussies that I was working with would go on to become group operators and venue managers and bar owners all around the country as well. So that's the joy of being in hospitality. You know, the way that the industry continues to evolve and grow, your relationships are really, really important. I still remember my wedding, which was the very first time that we released Triple Juniper. It was in April 2017, the 9th of April, because I know my wedding anniversary, thankfully. And it was amazing during the speeches watching Tim and George go around the room. There's a lot of bartenders in that room, and I could just see them all having conversations around the snifters of gin that were being passed around. And my wife leaned over to me and going, "Is this our wedding or your brand launch?" And I was like,
trade show.
ooh, uncomfortable. But from that day, really, the support has always been brilliant. And I immediately understood too that it's pretty easy to get it onto a back bar or to get it into a bartender's hands, but to get the second purchase, it needed to be good to keep on being sold. And that was the bit that I was probably the most anxious about and incredibly relieved at when we suddenly saw the orders coming in.
Very good. Sean, I want to step back just a little bit because we've gone down this slightly what I would describe more technical road and a bit more about the brand. But if we step back, I really like to ask why you do what you do. So from a more macro perspective, thinking about it, you know, with that sort of wide, high level, however you describe it, but stepping back, what is it that really inspires you to do what you do?
Hospitality is such a peculiar job. Sometimes you don't understand how you've fallen into it and you don't understand why you love it. It's almost like it's been a part of a previous life or a family bloodline. And I think it's fun to watch the way that people that aren't in the industry, like George, for example, who just come from a financial background, and his passion and family connection to hospitality, being a very passionate Greek man, he's fallen in love with what hospitality is all about. And sometimes you take that for granted because you don't get to stand back and see it. And I just love hospitality. Like, I love being around bartenders. I love the kind of people they are. I love the generosity that extends from people who are passionate about it, and I'm addicted to that. I love it so much. I love being in the presence of people whose sole purpose is to make other people happy. It's just an addictive sort of thing to sort of surround yourself with. But I think in terms of the brand itself, in terms of why I love working with brands, in particular, stepping from the bar industry to work as a brand ambassador for Diageo many moons ago, is I just love storytelling. You know, I really love telling stories. I really love the act of bringing people in to understand why a brand is so pertinent, why it's been so successful. And after many years at Diageo, I just got very hungry to tell my own story, to make my own kind of dent in the way that people talk about spirit. And thankfully, Never Never's been an incredible vehicle to be able to continue that storytelling.
That storytelling that you talk about, Sean, really resonates with me. And certainly working in bars, that's something, you're on this stage and you perform for your guests, you tell a story, and you see people light up, get so excited about whatever it is that you're talking about. If you talk about it passionately and do tell these stories, and you've been able to get your product into the hands and the mouths of these bartenders when they're on their soapbox, right? And I know that there's one award in particular that does hit home with you that isn't necessarily the largest award out there. But what is it about this award in particular? And tell us a bit about why that is and what it is.
Again, you hit the nail on the head. Like, we won #1 Hottest Bartender Spirit in the 2020 Hottest 100 Award. And that was a competition that was just voted on by bartenders and bar operators, and it effectively asked them to pinpoint their favorite spirit, the spirit that they wanted to work with the most. And to win that, to actually beat out whiskey brands and rum brands and hundreds of other gins here in Australia to be the most celebrated Australian bartender's product, was very, very humbling, especially when you consider the other competitors in the top 10 have big budgets and brand ambassadors all across the country and great ways of engaging from an advocacy perspective. At that stage, we were still just a very, very small brand without too many other contacts around Australia. So it meant a lot because, again, my background being in bars, we want to be Australia's most recommended spirit. It doesn't matter if that happens over the bar or bottle shop or at a barbecue. We want people to continue to spruik our brand messaging about flavour and feel confident and comfortable that the product that we create is worthy of making an absolute bang of G&T.
Appreciate you elaborating on that, Sean. So, Sean, given that you've worked so much in the industry, I'm sure you've got an interesting angle on this, and maybe it's going to be the same as many other guests before you with a similar answer, or maybe you've got something different. But I'd like to know from your perspective what hospitality is really defined by.
Hospitality is the generosity of one person making as many sacrifices as humanly possible for them to ensure that somebody else is having the better time. You know it when you see it. And you know the difference between someone who's just punching a card and doing their time and earning a wage, as opposed to someone who really loves what they do. And when you have the capacity to sit in front of one of those bartenders or be served by one of those waiters, or even have a coffee created by one of those baristas, it's such a different experience. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm passionate about creating a spirit that can be served by those people and be a part of that. As I get older, the way that you see hospitality through a whole range of different lenses, one of the most important values we have as a business, and we wrote our values very early on, the #1 one was celebrate hospitality. And that doesn't necessarily just mean every time you walk into a bar, tip your bartender. It's about the generosity that's required to continue to live and breathe that as a brand and as a business. And that's incredibly personal to me as well, and a big part of why I feel like we've got incredible culture, why I feel that it's a hugely important part of our fabric as a society. When you remove, I don't think there's ever been a more depressing and sadder experience than what we've had to go through over the last 2 years. I know we said we weren't going to talk about COVID, but when you take that part away and the mental health sort of situation of a whole country started to unravel. And, hospitality is so incredibly important, I think, when it comes to the creation of happiness.
I'm going to pick up on one of those threads. There's
multiple.
There are many. one earlier on in your answer, and that's around generosity. It sounds like generosity really resonates with you, as you've mentioned the word a few times. And there must be a balance that has to be struck between any business and their client, or staff, waiter, waitress, and the customer. You can't give away the house as well, but you want to be generous. So if generosity really resonates with you, how do you find the balance between what you need to hold on to and what you can give away?
I struggle with it. I think out of the three of us, the three founders, I'm the one that's always the most willing to kind of give the shirt off my back, I think. And I guess it just sort of comes down to having a very strong awareness of, yes, it's important to be generous in the way that you operate a business, I feel, especially when it comes to spirit. Like, I think when it comes to tasting and sampling and experiencing, the more you can put in people's mouths, the better, right? And I think it's also very much connected to my regional upbringing. I was born in country Queensland to a pretty devout Catholic family, and have always seen my mother be very generous with her time, and seen my dad always give people food and take people in. And my mum worked in Aboriginal communities when she was teaching in Mergen up in Queensland. And again, that's a very different situation to what a lot of people would appreciate and understand. There's a lot more poverty, and it's a lot more of a hard lifestyle for a lot of people that live in those town centres. And I guess that where that generosity and sense of giving and spirit comes from has been inbuilt in me from a very young age.
Yeah, I can feel that obviously resonates with you. It's a word that you've used a few times. And I can imagine, I don't know too much about your third founder, but George, with a finance background, I'm guessing, kind of holds you back from some of those.
And you need that.
Yeah,
And like, this is the thing too. Like, we'll talk about lots of different things, and I'll be like, we should definitely do this. And then George is the one who sort of understands the fiscal responsibilities of a business, trying to stay afloat during one of the most challenging periods that we've ever gone through. So absolutely. And you need that balance. And there's also sort of an expectation, I think, around generosity isn't giving a free shot to every bartender who walks in the room. Generosity is like, there has to be a balance. I'd never walk into a bar with the expectation of a free drink. I think, and a lot of people do sometimes, It can sometimes be one of the things that irks me the most when someone orders a shot of their own spirit and doesn't get their wallet out. I'm like, there's definite limitations that are applied.
A note for listeners that aren't from the booze world, this is something that is the case, and I don't want to go down the road to talk too much about that, but what Sean's talking about is, for listeners that aren't familiar with that, is certainly true. So for those at home, Sean, I'd like to ask you another question that leads us to the second half of the episode. And that's around what you're learning about or exploring. I'm just trying to understand where your attention is and what you're focusing on with the stage of business development that you're at.
So I'm the brand director, which is crazy, because usually brand directors have a wealth of education when it comes to marketing science, when it comes to the way that your brand lens, so to speak, is applied over every sort of facet of your business. And that's not been my background. My background was started off picking up glasses, as I said, in a nightclub, and working my way through cocktail bars, and then starting to work as a brand ambassador. One thing that I've learnt over the entire career is I still have to keep learning and listening to the people around me that are much more experienced, and putting my faith in the way that they're able to help me and educate me. So working with such a strong team at Never Never in terms of the brand team that are actually studied professionals when it comes to marketing science. And that's what I love. I love to continue to learn, to understand what makes great content, to understand the way that we can continue to sort of develop and transform and evolve this particular business from a small brand to a big brand. We've never talked about things like craft, not because I don't believe in that. Working through massive big brands, a lot of the time they rely on that word to somehow communicate that it's a better product than something that's not craft, for example. But I never wanted to have the day where I had to have the internal marketing conversation about, are we still a craft brand anymore? And I want to be a big brand. I want to be a big, big brand, and hopefully we can continue to get there. I'm not sure if I've gone down another rabbit hole. This is often what happens when I'm blagging on.
What is that big brand? Like, what's that level that you're aiming for?
Big brand is getting my gin and tonic on an international flight from Australia to London. Big brand is watching the Wallabies run out with Never Never across the back of the jersey. Big brand is being an indelible part of the drinking culture of Australia. I want to be a meme in 50 years' time about gin in the Australian vernacular. I want to be a big part of the way that people resonate, so that my kids and my kids' kids, when it comes to the conversations they have around Never Never, they can say, yeah, my dad started that.
I like that. Obviously, there's this element of legacy in there. Is that something that really drives you as well? Something that you want to leave? You're still a young guy, but legacy is something that I think drives all of us. Is that an element of what drives you?
I remember walking into venues and telling Johnnie Walker's story, about a kid who was handed the keys to a grocery store, and he turned what was effectively a very, very small whiskey operation into one of the world's most recognizable icons, right? And there's something that's incredibly powerful, I think, about that story, and hundreds of other stories like that within our industry. And I think those are the stories that really changed me and got into my head and made me understand a lot about what it takes to make a successful brand. Yeah, and I want a brand ambassador in 100 years telling my story. And I think that there is something about that legacy that excites me and makes me want to continue to make the sacrifices and be generous in all the things that we do.
When you talk about brand story again, and I think about storytelling from earlier in the conversation, it brings me back to Jamie, in fact, and the fact that one of the first events that I ever went to, in fact, the very first brand event I ever went to was one he invited me to that you were also at. And it was where I really appreciated what hospitality could be. Hospitality was about seeing these brands and seeing the brand story just really resonated with me and inspired me to do more in the industry that we're in. And even though I'm not bartending anymore, you're not bartending anymore, there are things that we do for and with hospitality that are well beyond that. But I just wanted to make that comment there that those early days, it was a Lagavulin. It was the release of Lagavulin.
I was trying to think of what it was. There we go.
Yeah. There were the VR headsets and the spray. And when we had the
that's
VR
big
headsets
brand.
That's spray.
That's big brand. When you get your own branded VR headsets, that's when it definitely hits another level. You mentioned that sort of how that resonates. And I think that's what every brand strives to achieve, and being an ex-brand ambassador, it was sort of built into me that we need to showcase the authenticity that we've created and that who I am. And it's often lost in the way that people talk about their businesses. It's sort of like what you said it earlier, like you've talked a lot about the brand and not so much about yourself, but in a lot of ways, there's a massively strong part of me and a connection to who I am as a human. And to sort of see people appreciate it and like it is also sort of like people appreciating me and liking what we do. So when you've got a whole room of bartenders there's so much competition for that brand space. You've got to ensure that you've got a great story and something that's authentic, because you can quickly sniff out the ones that aren't.
I appreciate your honesty with me as well, Sean, today, because you've been very open and honest with your feelings behind that. And maybe that's what resonated with hospitality as well, being the industry that you've really enjoyed. But that generosity and openness certainly comes through in the conversation that I felt with you today. I've still got many more questions, but for the sake of time, I need to cut it down. I'd love to spend all day chatting with you, Sean. I'd like to know, though, what you said there in that answer about being part of you. It's something that your brand is an expression of yourself. Well, long-time listeners will know in some episodes I kind of pepper these sorts of concepts, but being an art form in itself, I talk about hospitality as the ultimate art form, being the only art that engages all five senses. But I also see business as an incredible art in itself, and the business of hospitality, that's just this perfect storm, perfect marriage, where you have this intemporal art over many, many, many occasions where you can actually create prosperity out of it. But without going down a philosophical road, it's very interesting to hear you talk about that there being this expression of yourself, that it is part of you. Where do you see that next stage in your business development, being on this road to getting closer to the big brand?
When I was talking a little bit about it, it's an expression of me, and sometimes a subconscious expression of me. I still remember when I was putting together the design of the bottle and, oh no, we're going to pick a slanted label with a discernible colour. And I remember looking at our core range, Triple Juniper, Southern Strength and Juniper Freak. And I'm like, did I just do Johnnie Walker? Did I just Johnnie Walkerify like Never Never subconsciously? And walking around talking about the importance of slanted labels and colour to discern people's attention in a venue. It sort of happened naturally. It certainly wasn't something that I consciously did. And it worked. Who'd have thought, right? There's little things like that continue to express themselves. They're parts of my own background and story that come through in the conversation. Even the Never Never name, the Never Never is this incredible kind of reference point to, I guess, an old world sort of sense of what it means to be courageous. To step into the Never Never in Australian vernacular is about to test your mettle and to be fearless. And we put that Be Fearless on our logo because we knew that we needed to do that if we were going to be successful in business. So I think all the way through the development of our brand, and my personality has been a really big part of the way that we've continued to kind of make brand decisions and evolve towards that big brand. I don't know when we'll get there. I know we will, though. That's the cool thing. It's about continuing to inspire people through the products we make and continue to invite people to come along on this journey too. And I think that's the big bit. When people want to get on board, when people are really excited and have been a part of our journey from the very get-go and celebrate all the wins with you, that is incredibly intoxicating, much more than the gin.
Where have you been looking to model that growth? Because you've talked about your, learning a lot from your team. And that's where I see a lot of this humility come through when you're very honest about these people on your team who know more from a technical perspective to guide you in those decisions. But then I'm interested in a more abstract sense. Where are you looking externally to the business, to other industries or models, or maybe it's in the same industry even, but where are you taking points of inspiration from when you're developing the brand? You've touched on some other larger brands that you worked more intimately with in your career that maybe subconsciously guided some of those decisions. Where are you looking?
There's definitely other brands that we look towards for inspiration. And I know I was talking a bit about generosity earlier, and it's important to hospitality, but big brands like Four Pillars, it's hard not to be an Australian gin business and not aspire to be at their level. And they continue to be so impressive in the way that they lead this industry. Their founders put pressure on the Australian government to create better tax reform. They do so much to be able to kind of give back to the industry. And Cam, in particular, as a producer, has always been an open book. The amount of people have called him up for help or assistance or how to do this or how to do that. And he's been so happy to be able to give them advice. I'm surprised there's not 1,000 rare dry gins around the country because he's so willing and generous with his time and his energy. People like Dave Vitale at Starwood is another mentor of mine personally, who's, again, a revolution, if you like, in the Australian whiskey industry and continues to fly the flag for creativity on the global market.
And Dave was on the show a long time ago now, must have been about 2018. I can't remember. For those interested, Dave has a great episode quite a while back now. I think it might have been maybe 49 or 59, something back there. But yeah, really fascinating conversation.
Very
that was after the release of Twofold. I went down to Melbourne for the release of Twofold, which is really exciting too.
Which has now become a huge whiskey and has completely shaped their business. So obviously there's lots of other brands that we could talk about, but those are probably the two that are the most important when it comes to what we aspire to be. They're both big brands, and I know that they probably wouldn't admit that themselves, but we see them as brands that really are paving the way for other smaller producers like us, such as ourselves, to continue to aspire to be at that level.
Fantastic. Sean, you mentioned Cam and you mentioned Dave in your answer there, being these gentlemen who've established large brands in the industry that you're in. Who else do you look to, not necessarily to model growth, but a lot of people talk about mentors and whether it's a formal or an informal person or group of people that you lean on for some advice. Who is it that you're working with or looking to?
I speak to Dave Vitale very regularly, and he's certainly somebody who has done it all before. And I think it's important from a business perspective to ask for help when you need it or to seek advice when you've got access to it. And David has always been so generous with his time and his effort to make sure that if there's things that we need to ask or there's directions that we need to go in, that they're the right ones. And, he always sort of says, use my mistakes as the guide as opposed to going out and making them yourself. And it's wonderful to have those sorts of people. And I don't think there's really anybody else that I could mention because David's been such an important sort of inspiration for us as well.
So when you're looking outside of the growth of your business, maybe for even not necessarily more specific or more niche things, are there advisors that you have around you, or even your other, often guests sometimes talk about partners of theirs personally or professionally? Or
Dave's an incredible human when it comes to what he's been able to deliver and the advice that he gives. But to be honest, we haven't needed to surround ourselves with a huge amount of external mentors because the three of us, the three founders, myself, George and Tim, have come from such different backgrounds. And I think when you're starting a business, when you've got the capacity to have such a wide range of different viewpoints and skill sets has been incredibly important. George has come from a very strong business background, understands the financials of what we're going through explicitly. He's been hugely important in things like capital raising and a whole range of other sort of issues. And his connection and understanding with that market is just so, so valuable to the way that you would grow a business. Tim's background, albeit also financial, but his production capacity and understanding has been so important, and the way that he's also been able to bring his previous experiences in business into the way that he's able to grow his production team and to continue to outsource ingredients and to work through our sustainability projects, and all sorts of things has been built from his background. And my background was hospitality, and that was the final sort of missing piece of the puzzle, and ensuring that we all had, you know, our jobs to do. And it's been without question why we've been successful.
To do that effectively, you really do have to remove ego in that too. And I find that not all, but many successful entrepreneurs or, you know, founders of these large businesses, successful being maybe not necessarily even large is successful, but you do have to respect other people's knowledge and skills. And you obviously have that. They must have it with you to allow you to flourish in your respective areas, because you can have differences of skills, but too many chefs. And so, you know, spoiling the broth, the proverbial broth, right? To do that effectively, Sean, you really do have to have partners that respect each other's knowledge and skill sets. And quite clearly, you all do, because you can have people that are successful but overlap in their skills. So it's interesting to hear that that's how you three run the business. Sean, my next question doesn't really do the entire question justice. And I preface this question almost every episode with that, or something similar. But I'd like to know, ultimately, the question is, what's your biggest challenge right now? But it means a lot more than that. What I'm actually looking for is, where is the friction coming from? Where are you focusing your attention now that is challenging you?
Oh, James, I've got 2 kids under 3, mate. I think sleep is probably the biggest challenge right now, but that's still an important sort of balance, making sure that I'm there for my family. When you're starting a business, it requires lots of your time. I'm in Brisbane right now doing this podcast, and I'm not at home helping with nappies and assisting my wife. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge for me personally, is ensuring that I'm still the best dad and the best husband I could possibly be, while still being motivated and being there for my other partners, my business partners, of course. I don't think there's really any other way to split that answer. It's such an important part of who I want to be as a family man, and to ensure that I don't make the sacrifices that can often break down marriages and separate families, because, you know, you give too much to the business. So I never want to go down that road.
So how are you navigating that? Is it around expectations with people around you?
I think you navigate it by being aware that it might not go as fast as you want. You could certainly try and do everything and be everywhere and do every trade show and speak to every single person and to travel the country and do as many masterclasses as you possibly can. And, you know, eventually you'll burn out and you won't be the right kind of person for your family, which is, for me, one of the most important things that I want to make sure I'm always there for. So I think it's just being patient. Having patience when it comes to business, I think, is still important. You know, work hard and lay the foundations for success, but appreciate the fact that the whole reason why I do what I do in South Australia, why I moved there, was for lifestyle. You know, I want to have incredible family. I want to be around people that I love. I love the produce, I love the food, and I love living there. And I don't want to sacrifice that just so that we get to a big brand maybe 5 years sooner.
We've talked about big brand, this brand that you're aiming towards building. And obviously your angle is more around a brand perspective. What is the next step for you in achieving that big brand?
Awareness is the most important thing for any business, especially now, especially in the age that we live in, where there's so many distractions. You know, the TikToks and the Instagrams and the social medias is just one level of awareness, but in such a competitive market, to actually hold someone's attention and to be considered to be at the top of your game as a product is incredibly, I guess, challenging to do. I feel like we've got the liquid. We've got an incredibly strong, beautiful gin that's well celebrated. And now it's about telling as many people as we can. I think that's the biggest challenge. That's the next step that we need to sort of get a better awareness of, is how we actually start to communicate that story and tell that story to as many people as possible.
How are you going about doing that?
I don't know. Do you know?
I wish.
At the moment, we're investing. I think that's probably the thing that holds small businesses back, is the investment piece. That's the scary bit, right? Like when you can pay people to do great awareness campaigns and to put your name as many places as possible. But Jesus, enormously expensive to do. And it's when you've scratched for every inch, and we've fought for every inch of distillery space, and we've evolved and we've grown. And the investment in a 1,000-litre still built in Germany, hand-hammered by Carl, right in the middle of COVID was a terrifying investment. And we're at that next stage where we know that we have to invest in order to be able to tell more people about it. And that's more resourcing in staff, more resourcing in advocacy. And of course, the traditional formats of advertising and ensuring that we're really aware of the extent that we have to go in order to grow that awareness piece.
Fantastic. Sean, I just have one last question for you today. And who would you like to hear on the show?
Oh, you've already mentioned some people. Like, I love Dave Furtado, Jamie Fleming. They're all brilliant. Sven Almenning has done it as well.
Sven hasn't done it.
He hasn't done it.
Someone else mentioned Sven.
I think Sven's. Well, I used to work for Sven for many years, and he's a very interesting personality. He's again.
I don't know if we elaborated on the last episode, but if you want to tell listeners who Sven actually is.
So Sven Almenning runs a hospitality business across Australia, really, in terms of the Speakeasy Group. And used to run a brand agency called Behind Bars, which I had the lucky enough to be a part of. And really, if you look at it, again, subconsciously, it was very important in the way that I kind of continued my own growth and direction towards being a brand owner myself. So I think he's a very quirky cat, as he likes to call himself, and he's very interesting. He owns a couple of Viking-inspired restaurants in Sydney and Melbourne, and again, is a passionate about not only hospitality, but also his own heritage and his own background. So I think your listeners would be very interested if Sven jumped on and had a chat.
Yeah, I mentioned when another guest of mine mentioned Sven, I think we're connected on Facebook, but other people that you have brought up in the episode as well, like Dave. Be great to have Dave back on the show. And I've not had Cam. I've not had anyone from Four Pillars.
Cam, Stu Gregor, you wouldn't be able to shut up. So I think if you got one of those boys on there, it'd be very interesting. I think there's Cam McKenzie and Stu would be a pretty good duo if you ever do a double.
I did sit next to them at a gin dinner once. So it was a Four Pillars. It was the pig.
The pig dinner?
Yeah, the pig dinner.
Oh, they're very good.
But anyway, Sean, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program today. It's been a pleasure having you on, hearing more about your journey and the workings that are behind the scenes to create the brand that you have today, which some may even consider to be a big brand.
Thanks very much for having me, James. It's been a pleasure.
This program is hosted by James Henderson. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.